I love your approach, picking maybe one grape, but it's grown in different countries, or perhaps go with one region. It's that side-by-side comparison that is so illustrative of the differences between wines.
That really has opened up our eyes doing verticals and horizontal tastings.
Yes, and we mean the wines, not the people, when we say horizontal and vertical. So, all right. Horizontal is like Shiraz from different wineries or different regions, but vertical would be Shiraz from one winery, but going back to older vintages.
We actually did a vertical tasting Pinot Noir from a specific producer and tasted 4 different wines. It is interesting to see how the grapes grown in the same location with the same winemaker, everything's the same, still turn out different. It's very eye-opening when you taste them side by side like that.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my 3rd book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 198. What's the single best thing you can do to improve your tasting skills? How can you discover some unusual but delicious wine and food pairings? And how does music change the taste of wine? You'll hear those tips and stories in my chat with sisters Sandy Dawkins and Michelle Lester, who co-host the podcast Wines to Find. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show with the continuing story of publishing my new wine memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much. Well, now, things are starting to get so exciting. My publisher has just sent me 2 concepts for the new book cover. Although the designs aren't hugely different, I definitely prefer one over the other. Cover design is second only to the title in attracting prospective readers. We do judge a book by its cover. It's the face of the book, and it's meant to convey the genre, the style of writing, the book's personality, and hint at the story that we'll discover. Bookstores are like a crowded party where everyone, every book, is shouting from the shelves, "Read me, read me." So designs have become bolder and brighter, almost art objects. Online, book cover design matters even more. A cover has to stand out in a sea of flat 2D images on book retail websites. On Instagram, bookstagrammers pair a book with lifestyle artifacts, from steaming coffee to cozy blankets. So the more photogenic a cover is, the better it does on visual social media channels. These days, the greatest risk for a cover design is that it's safe and boring. The 2 designs for my memoir both feature a wine glass and fire, but the fonts, colors, images, and formats are different. I'd love to know which one you like best. You'll find images of the covers in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/198. I've also posted a link to a blog post called Diary of a Book Launch in the show notes, and this is where I share more behind-the-scenes stories about the journey of taking this memoir from idea to publication. If you want a more intimate insider seat beside me on this journey, please let me know you'd like to become a beta reader and get a sneak peek at the manuscript. Email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. Okay, on with the show. Sisters Sandy Dawkins and Michelle Lester co-host the fabulous podcast Wines to Find. Sandy is a consultant in the public safety communications industry and a former teacher. She's also a wife and mother of 3, an avid reader, a podcast listener, boating enthusiast, and traveler. Michelle is the director of operations for an asset management company. She's a wife, mother of 2, avid reader, podcast listener, college sports, and travel enthusiast. Welcome, Sandy and Michelle. It's so great to have you with us.
Thank you so much. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, we're thrilled.
Right.
It's a bucket list item for me.
A spittoon bucket or a regular bucket? Let's be specific, ladies.
One of
Just
the
kidding.
podcasts she avidly consumes is yours. So definitely bucket list. Yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I've been enjoying yours too now that we've connected and I'm listening to your back catalog, so to speak. They're terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start off, and the two of you can decide who's fielding the questions, but I'd like to hear from both of you on most of these. Was wine part of your family dinner table when you were growing up?
So typically, we did not have wine sitting at our dining room table, but we were not teetotalers. Mom would have like an Asti Spumante, an Italian night. Her main drink was like a margarita on the rocks was her favorite. Our stepfather drank beer, and our dad, he was more of a spirits guy or a beer guy. So there was no true wine lover that we could follow in the footsteps.
We did not grow up appreciating wine.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And you, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you grew up and now live in South Carolina?
Yes.
We did not grow up in South Carolina, but we've been here a long, long time. Well, me longer. I'm older.
Younger.
Okay.
So we've been here for 30 years. It's here.
Okay.
It's a long time. 30 years.
It's home. It's home now, at least. And did one of you get into wine before the other?
I was probably tardy to the party because I'm younger.
That's Michelle.
Yes, that's me. Sandy thinks she started at age 23-ish, and so I would have been 19. So I think really for me, it was more late 20s, early 30s. But I do remember us talking about wine and journaling and, especially when the kids were younger.
We were both avid journalists, recording what our wines tasted like, which ones we liked, which ones we wanted to taste. And we both did that early on.
I thought I had it right here in this drawer, but I don't. I was going to pull it up because when we did our first episode, we gave our wine story and we both brought our journals that went back to gosh knows when.
Oh, wow. That's great. So that must be part of the motivation in creating your own podcast, Wines to Find. But tell me about the moment what really triggered the decision to say, yes, let's start a podcast together?
Well, Michelle's oldest daughter was on a Maymester in Europe. And she said, do you guys want to come over? So we were like, sure.
Yes.
And we were going to France and Italy. And we both looked at each other and we were like, we kind of, as life goes, you don't keep up with learning about wine. We just kind of let it, kids and everything, life got in the way. So we were like, oh gosh, we really don't know enough. So as we were sitting on the train going from Paris to Annecy, which was our next stop, we were like, we have got to do a better job of keeping up and learning and expanding about wine. Here we are in wine Mecca, and we really don't know as much as we really wish we did. So we decided then and there that we were going to start to record and expand our journey. And then we were like, you know what? I like podcasts. Well, I like podcasts too. Let's do a podcast.
Well, that makes sense. But did you ever contemplate doing like a YouTube show instead? Or why were you drawn to podcasts specifically?
So we started out with a podcast because the audio experience really does appeal to us. And we do listen to podcasts, especially working, exercising. A video based is just requires you to kind of be tied like a TV, whereas,
or at least you want it to be.
Yeah, because you want to see the interaction. But the audio experience, you can do it anywhere while you're exercising, whatever. And so, buds in the ears is just kind of what appealed to us because that's what we consume. But now we're going video.
Good for you.
Yeah, we did about a year in. We started a YouTube channel. We did that for the summer because what turned out happening was we really had so much in that first year that we were experiencing and doing. We were like, we wanted to focus on white wines, but based on the editorial calendar that we had, we couldn't fit it in. So we're like, we're going to YouTube.
And we didn't want to add a second day to our drop. We drop on Thursdays, an episode every Thursday.
Yeah.
So we thought, well, let's see if we can do it on YouTube. And that way it can be as needed.
Yeah. So now what we're going to do, we did that for that summer. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to combine and get the video and the audio and do the audio podcast and then the video podcast. So
and we think that'll be beneficial to the consumer so they can see the wine, see some resources that we have. So we thought that may be beneficial.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's great. No, I like the dual aspect because, I mean, as you know, we work so hard in terms of trying to produce a podcast, the research and booking guests and so on to make it a valuable experience for the listener. It can sometimes be a different video audience. As you said, it's like being tied down to a TV, but some people find that relaxing. And so you might tap into two very different audiences that way. I find that's the case for this podcast because, of course, it goes out as a video on social media in addition to this audio version. So,
well, and you have your visual learners and you have your auditory learners, and you want to be able to appeal to both. So, but one thing when we're talking about the content for the podcast, one thing that we do every podcast is we try 2 wines we have never had before. That helps us grow our palate and expand our knowledge basis and taste range for wine.
Because that's really the way you learn is you have to taste.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you've inspired me. I mean, I love interviewing people like you, but I had gotten away from wine tasting during the podcast. So as a result of our previous conversation where I'm talking to you on your podcast, we are doing that today, and I'm going to make it a regular feature going forward on my podcast where it won't be at the top of the podcast like yours is, but midway down, at least the guest and I will each pick wines and taste them together. So I really appreciate the nudge toward doing that again. Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
good.
Because we're wine lovers. We want to know what to get or buy or whatever. Cool. So tell us about the name of your podcast, how you came up with Wines to Find.
Well, I have to give credit where credit's due. My husband named it. We were all sitting around the table. Our sound guy is John, who's
my husband.
Michelle's husband. My husband really doesn't do much with this. He's a little laid back. But that night we were all together and we were having dinner and over wine. What should we name the podcast? And he ended up saying, well, one of your goals is to eliminate any issues with picking out wine whenever you go to a wine store. So you basically take the WTF out of finding a wine. And so we said, yeah, so wines to find. We help take the WTF out of finding a great wine.
I love that double entendre because we all know what WTF stands for, which we will not say the other one so we don't get marked as explicit. But I love that. It's
cheeky. A little cheeky.
Yeah, exactly, as you said. So how do you choose the wines that you'll taste? You've already mentioned you choose those that you haven't tasted before generally, but I mean, there's an ocean of wine out there. How do you choose?
So a lot of it will be guest or topic dependent, depending on, so if we have a certain topic that we're exploring, obviously the wine is going to fall into that topic. If it's a region or a taste profile or something. If it's a guest, generally our podcast has a lot of winemakers or vintners themselves. So we're talking with the people making the wine or involved in making the wine. So generally they're sending us the wine
that they want to showcase their best feature. So that's how we end up coming with that. Or, for example, we just did an episode about Australian wines because Michelle said, I really have not been able to do a deep dive into Australia. So we added that as one of our personal growth options. So we try at least one episode a month where it's just us, where we're growth, and then 3 episodes. The other 3 generally are a winemaker, a wine enthusiast, something to be able to further that aspect of the podcast.
Right.
Sure. And that's a great idea. I love your approach as I've been listening to your episodes, and picking maybe one grape, but it's grown in different countries, or perhaps go with one region, or different wines or whatever. I think it's that side-by-side comparison that is so illustrative of the differences between wines that people sometimes miss, and why they get intimidated by wine is because they're only having one glass at a time, whereas it's that side-by-side tasting that really will, the differences.
That really has opened up our eyes doing verticals and horizontal tastings.
Yes. And we mean the wines, not the people, when we say horizontal and vertical. So, all right. I should just define that for somebody who may not know, but horizontal is like Shiraz from different wineries or different regions, but vertical would be Shiraz from one winery, but going back to older vintages. So
Correct.
Okay, great. All right.
We actually did a vertical tasting. The guys join us for Valentine's Day. They have for the last couple of years. So we did a vertical Pinot Noir from a specific producer and tasted 3 or 4 different wines to see, because it is interesting to see how the grapes grown in the same location with the same winemaker, everything's the same, still turn out different. It's very eye-opening when you taste them side by side like that.
It is. And how certain grapes tend to show more differences going back in time than others. There's so many variations.
Or the winemaker allowing that to happen.
Yeah, that's true. By intervention or not. Yeah, exactly.
Or not, generally.
Yes. And how do you score the wines you taste? You have an interesting scoring system.
We do. Since we do have winemakers on and we taste a lot of different wine, we don't want to judge the quality because we aren't wine experts. So we're not going to judge the quality.
And wine is very subjective. Just because we think it's the one thing doesn't mean that's the same thing for someone else.
So we started off with that premise in mind when we came up with this scoring system. And we wanted to be able to have it scored so that way we would know what bottle to go purchase again if we really liked it or not for ourselves. So we have 5 corks. 1 cork is find the kitchen sink. It just wasn't good. 2 corks is you'll finish the glass because it was pretty good.
You're being polite, really.
Yeah, really, you're just being polite because 2 is still. Then 3 corks is you will go get another glass. It was interesting enough that it was pulling you in. 4 corks is, oh, that was an interesting bottle. I need to go ahead and find it and explore it more, try it on a different day with a different food. 5 corks is you really enjoyed it. You want to buy a whole case or give it as a gift.
I like that. It's very consumer friendly and relatable too. Because sometimes those scores out of 100, I score out of 100, but sometimes they can mean very different things to different people. Like, when you were in school, did an 89 mean, wow, that's a great score? Or today, and often in the wine market, the 89 is like, oh, you didn't make it. People only buy 90 and above.
Right. Well, and that's originally how we started looking at wines, was looking at those scores. And now we kind of are like, we don't use that as much.
No.
Right. Right. Yeah. And with great inflation. Yeah. Everything seems to be over the 90s anyway these days, but that's very practical the way you approach it. Now, while we're talking about scores and scoring, Michelle, you're an expert Yelp and travel reviewer. What does that mean?
So I am an expert Yelp and travel review consumer, which means that I Yelp everything, or I like to see what other people think about things.
She crowdsources.
I crowdsource, which makes sense because that's what we're doing with the podcast. So basically what I do is I'll, especially like for wine, I have tools and resources that I'll go and look and see what others say about it to kind of help direct me with a restaurant.
Wine apps.
Yeah. I'll look at restaurants and see, because again, somebody might really love something that's just not my taste. I'm never going to love it. So if I can look at their other different reviews and say, okay, well, their taste just isn't similar to mine, then that tells me that that's not really, I have to weight that star down,
On Yelp.com. It's a site that reviews, what do they review? Restaurants? Do they review wineries? Like all kinds of different destination things?
They review a lot of different things.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it's wide. And she also was able to find the best croissants when we were in Paris using Yelp.
Very handy.
Yeah. We had to go a little bit to get them, but it was worth it.
It was.
I'll bet. Oh, that's great. And so you often taste wines for the first time during your podcast. What happens if you really, really don't like the wine?
You do this one, Michelle.
So we've really not had very many. Some people have very specific music tastes and they only listen to certain music. And some people have a broad taste in music and lots of different music can appeal to them.
We're wine lovers of all wine.
Broad spectrum wine lovers. So it's really difficult to find those that are, find the sink. I will say that there have one in particular that as soon as I tasted it, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know that I can drink it enough to do this. One in the history of 100 plus episodes, 2 wines per episode minimum. That's very few wines that really strike us that way. But we're generally, what we do then is we look at, well, who would it appeal to? What taste profile? And then when we talk about that review, we'll say it's not our particular taste, but if you like this and this, I can see where this wine would appeal to you.
If you like tasting by the kitchen sink, I don't know. That wine sounds like it's liquid Drano. Okay, cool. Fair enough. Have you ever heard from a winemaker whose wine he or she felt you did not rate as highly as warranted?
Not on that. No, never. No, I will say that same wine that I just did not particularly enjoy. And I have to say it was from an
He was
Well,
not on the podcast.
He's not
Okay.
ever been on the podcast, but we were in a clubhouse when Clubhouse was like really the thing. And we were doing a lot of Clubhouse things. And I ended up in a chat room with him, like a Clubhouse room. And I texted him. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is here. Good thing he doesn't know.
Well, that was a near miss.
Most of the things that we do have on the podcast are good, boutique, solid wines. I mean, we have been exceptionally blessed in
We
that
have
because, I mean, sometimes I feel like, gosh, we just keep giving 4s and 5s, but these are really good.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, well, that's
but
great.
we've had our fair share of 2s and 3s.
Mhm.
And like you said, I think maybe 1 or 2 1s.
Yeah. Not very many. I really can think of one for me and one for you that were ones. And the rest of them were definitely worth revisiting in some way.
Sure. Is there a region or a grape style over which the two of you disagree palate wise? Like, does one of you like a big full bodied Chardonnay and the other just really loves her Riesling or something like that?
Well, so starting out, there were 2 wines that are varietals that we either agreed or disagreed on. I preferred Chardonnay at the beginning. Sandy's not a big Chard fan. And Sandy preferred Pinot Noir. And I'm not a big Pinot Noir fan. But over the course of doing this, we've opened each other's eyes up. I do believe there's a wine out there for everybody. And I believe there's a varietal out there for everybody. So you might not like the way it's done in this winemaker's hands, but in this winemaker's hands and from this region, you might really enjoy this varietal. And that's what we've exposed ourselves to.
Right. And just trying more wines like that. I think I probably had a couple of bad Chardonnays and that turned me off. So then therefore I stopped trying them. But now there are several that are really just fabulous. And I'm like, well, I don't know why I didn't like it before.
Right.
So
Sure. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, Chardonnay especially is just I don't know, it's like the most versatile grape, it seems, among all of them. Oaked, unoaked, like cool climate, warm climate, full malolactic, giving it buttery notes, or none with an edgy sort of racy acidity. I can imagine, if you didn't have a good first experience with a grape like that, you'd assume others would be similar, and yet they can be so dramatically different.
very different.
Very, very different.
Yeah. Sandy, who has been your favorite guest on the podcast so far?
I know exactly who my favorite guest is. Her name is Nicola with Spanish Palate. I believe she's on episode 36, I believe it was.
And Spanish Palate is what? Is it a winery?
She's originally from England, but she lives in Spain now, and she's an advocate for the grower. And she's taken these growers and helped promote Spanish wines throughout the world. So that's Spanish Palate. So we actually had her on 3 different episodes, but her first episode, which is episode 36, she tells a story about her mentor that has really helped her and developed her wine journey, that he is so fabulous. He is a wine cellar that takes an elevator and goes down to the bottom, like 30 stories or something like that, down into the earth. And then within that wine cellar that's, down in this true cave that you have to go 30 stories down.
That his family has owned for generations.
Yes. And he's an old generation.
He celebrated his 100th.
Yeah, he just celebrated his 100th birthday. I believe it was last year. He has a barrel that was on Santa Maria.
My goodness.
That is now in his wine cellar.
This is one of the ships
Christopher
that
Columbus.
Sailed.
Yes. Exactly. And I just was like,
wow.
That's the mind blowing.
That hit home to me of how history and wine is just all connected and the stories that you can hear. And that's just my favorite one.
Oh my gosh. I can imagine going down in this elevator and just seeing that barrel in a spotlight or something. I'm envisioning it like a painting. That would be awesome. Wow. Cool. And Michelle, do you have a favorite as well?
I do. We did an episode there's a winemaker in California that we love. His name is Grant Long. He does not do media. He does very few appearances. He is a very close friend of a friend of ours who's really John's wine mentor. And it's a family that we've known forever. And so we were able to bring Grant on the episode, plus have our 2 friends on that introduced us to Grant and then Grant's wines, therefore. And Grant is the best storyteller. Our friends say he's the most interesting man in the world instead of the guy for the beer. It's really Grant. And it was just such a treat because it just illustrates the relationships and then the stories that we tell and that he tells and each tell throughout the episode really illustrate how wine connects people and makes lifelong friendships. And it's just a great episode.
It's, heartwarming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And was there one story he told that stands out in particular?
Well, there's one that there's a famous restaurant here and it's in Charleston called Hall's. And the proprietor actually just passed away recently, but it's very well known for its wine list. And Brent, who is on the episode, never goes and buys off the table or the wine list. He always brings his own wine, and generally it's Grant's wine. So Mr. Hall came up and he said, "Oh, we don't do that here." And wine steward had to go and ask permission to let them have that. Yes. And so he comes over and he looks and he says, "Oh, you have that wine. Yes, you can do this." And turns out he knew Grant from a position that Grant had that he had when he was in California. So again, it's just so...
It's all the connections.
Relationship. Yeah. So anyway, so Grant's wine is Mr. Hall approved.
That's great. Now, on another episode, you talked with some folks about how music can affect the taste of wine. Tell us more about what you discovered during that chat.
That was very interesting because Michelle and I both had separately heard that wine does, or music does affect wine. I actually even saw it with like a chocolate tasting and how whenever you're listening to different music, the frequency can change if it's bitter, if it's sweet. So we ended up speaking with the couple more podcasters, Music in a Bottle. Yeah, Music in a Bottle is the name of their podcast. And so we did a collaboration with them where they chose music for two of the wines that we had. We had like a sparkling Riesling, and we paired music to that sparkling Riesling and tasted it to see how it would change. And then we had a Cabernet and had music to see how it changed and if it made it more mellow, if you played something that was soft or smooth or heavy metal and what it sounded like, and if there was any difference in the taste of it. And it definitely does affect.
Yeah.
It did, eh? Wow. That must be our perception of the taste. I guess maybe obviously not the actual taste.
Yes, I think it's the way it all interacts.
The senses.
And what you taste isn't what I taste because it is so subjective. So what is consistent in the research, and there's research on it, is that there are taste points along the tongue. And I guess certain audio experiences then enhance certain placements on the tongue. So if you hear something and the food that you're having has this element, it can either enhance it or dull it, depending.
And then some new age people say it has to do with the frequency too, that will change it. And that's episode 68.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
wow.
We actually built the playlist that you can search. It's Wines to Find
on Spotify.
By Music in the Bottle.
Oh,
so
terrific.
You can do your own little tasting with it. Yeah.
That is great. And, I've also read research where sometimes the senses can cross wires. Like some people hear music as color. Like, I don't know if it's synesthesia or something like that. So who knows what's happening with our brain wiring, but I can see it like that, one sense can impact the other, taste and sound. Makes total sense to me. Yeah. Very interesting. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Sandy and Michelle. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, I love their approach to learning about wine through vertical and horizontal tastings. Whether that's picking maybe one grape, but it's grown in different countries, or maybe go with a particular region. It's that side-by-side comparison that is so illustrative of the differences between wines. Number 2, they share some really great tips about how to discover unusual but delicious food and wine pairings. And number 3, I found their insights into how music can change our perception of the taste of wine really fascinating. In the show notes, you'll find my email contact, the full transcript of my conversation with Sandy and Michelle, links to their podcast and website, and where you can find the live stream video versions of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. You'll also find a link to my free Ultimate Guide to Food and Wine Pairing. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/198. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or would like to become a beta reader of my new memoir at natalie@nataliemclean.com. You won't want to miss next week when we continue our chat with Sandy and Michelle. In the meantime, if you missed episode 11, go back and take a listen. I chat about the world's best wines with Forbes columnist Katie Kelly Bell. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
One of the most fascinating stories was 10 years ago. Somebody based in Epernay, a Frenchman, snuck into the vineyard at night and injected 2 of the vines with pesticide and poison.
Oh, wow.
Then a few weeks later, he sent a letter to Aubert, and the letter basically had a map of the vineyard, and he circled the 2 vines that he'd poisoned. He said, obviously, you're trying to protect your vaunted reputation, so if you don't give me €1 million, then game is over.
That is amazing.
So David Lane, of course, is not concerned about his reputation. And so he contacted the investigators and they made fake euros. And the guy said, I want you to put my €1 million in the cemetery nearby. So, of course, they put the 1 million fake euros in the cemetery and staged police officers. And he walked by and picked it up and they nabbed him not long after. And they said, yeah, I just got out of prison and I figured this was a way to make some money.
If you liked this episode, please email or tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wines and stories we discussed. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a wine that tastes even better with your favorite song. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.